when you consider the actual work done. That's when the spaces in between are removed, the gaps are removed. 10 to 11 hours to actually do all the work. And if that was a $5,000 single-side transaction, a single-end transaction, for say selling a $175,000 home, that's $5,000 in 10 hours. That's $500 an hour. Is that a pretty good return on your invested time? Where would you make more money than that? Isn't that good? I mean, isn't that very substantial? And yet most of them are practically starving to death. Isn't that interesting? And so, literally, all revolutionary changes that have taken place up to now, we've seen a few systems changes and so on and so forth. I've been in the business for 30 years. And we've seen it change from time to time. And yet, ultimately, nobody's retiring rich. Did you ever meet anybody that ever did? I never did. I mean, I've interviewed thousands of people in 30 years. I've never met anybody that retired rich as a result of being in this business. That includes all the people that own brokerages. And you could be there for 30 years and run a brokerage and sell it for $700,000 by the time the government gets through with you. It's petty cash. That's not rich. And yet we sell this huge commodity for this big commission, and nobody's making it. So, is that a paradox? Yes, it is. Should we take a look at this? Maybe there's a better way. Have you noticed that in the industry, it's a kind of an interesting observation, we're just looking at this together, that there seems to be a lack of pass-me-down wisdom from management to sales that's of any consequence whatsoever to get the most and the best out of the salespeople. And yet, as an agent, you would think that it would make really good common sense for the broker, the franchisee, or the manager, whoever happens to be the stagecoach driver, you know who I'm talking about, usually the manager. It would be in their best interest to pass down everything they knew to you on a regular basis, educational, motivational, inspirational material, to get the most and the best out of you, because you're the person, as an agent, that generates all the frontline money, that pays all the bills, that creates all the profit for the broker. Wouldn't it make sense that they would do that? And yet when we observe this across the entire North American continent, we found that doesn't seem to be the case at all. Now here's part of the reason. It's not always the case, but it's part of the reason. When we studied why a lot of people opened up brokerages, you know, to be the boss, we found that the reason why at that point was because the people that did it couldn't sell on straight commission. They weren't very good at it. So what they did was they were perhaps more bookish, more administrative, more technically oriented, more detail oriented. What they did was they facilitated an operation for other people who could sell the product, right? They provided an environment for people to do that. But because they couldn't do it themselves very well, they weren't a great person to pass down wisdom to you because they didn't know how to do it. So consequently, the person running the show is not always the best person to teach you, train you, and coach you to pass down that wisdom. So we find that the educational insurgence into this business is not as substantial as other industries. For instance, the insurance industry is much more highly trained than the real estate business is. In fact, if we look at it from the standpoint of an industry versus a business, nobody's really taken real estate and made it into a business. It's just an industry. It's not a good business model. And that's why the banks don't back real estate brokerage openings from the standpoint of providing the money necessary to open up a brokerage. Right across North America, small loans business lenders don't want to lend money to real estate brokers to open up a real estate office. And it's because they do not have any faith in the business model. It's built on hit and miss. It's built on only as good as your last transaction. It's built on a lack of pass-me-down of wisdom. Now, I had the opportunity to work for a big corporation. I worked for RE/MAX for 13 years. I wore the sweater proud. We walked tall. I worked directly for the chairman of the board. We had a lot of fun doing that. Learned a lot of stuff. It was just a great experience for me. In fact, really speaking, if it hadn't been for RE/MAX, Exit would not exist. So I send them a Christmas card every year to thank them. I'm so happy about that. And as we studied the evolution of real estate, and there's an evolution that's transpired. Some of you have been here ever since the beginning, and you know exactly where I'm going with this. In the beginning, let's go back a bit. Let's look at the industry from a perspective standpoint. When it all started, the commission splits out there were like 50-50. 50-50, 60-40, 70-30, and that's about as high as it ever went. And the business, as such, the industry, was simply a part-time job. People retired into real estate. That's what you did after you finished your other job, and nobody really saw it as a career. It wasn't until desk fees came in, whereby there was a little hostility created. You had to pay for the privilege of earning a top commission. You had to pay those bills at the end of the month. Did we start to get something out of people? You know, they had a responsibility. It was a full-time job. You had to do this because you got to pay the bill at the end of the month. So it was a little bit like Pavlov's dog. Some of those bills got very substantial, but we saw bigger production. It was good. So we went from public school, which was the old way, the way it's all started as a part-time job, to high school. We're starting to get people to pay attention to do this as a career, and we saw some substantial earnings, thank you very much, and it started to go quite high. We saw the birth of ego. That's where, you know, people started to really compete against each other to put plastic on mantles, right? That's what made it happen. And there was other competitive firms out there and so on and so forth, but, you know, it looked as if this was something. Then we saw another spin-off come in, deal fees. Deal fees came in 1983. The Remax system, for all intents and purposes, nobody copied them. They came down the hill like a transport truck in the 1980s, the highest rising, longest lasting positive market in history up until the last 7 years, which even topped out that. And nobody duplicated them. So that was an interesting observation. It worked, but nobody copied them. Wow. Now, as we observe things, as things work in this industry, we find that there's no copycat syndrome in the real estate business. Deal fees came in as a spin-off of that. A little bit of a watered-down situation, and because it was watered down, it didn't have the intensity, it never got the egos that the desk fee companies got. It never became as substantially powerful as the desk fees. So desk fees, that way of going about it, was a little bit different. A vertical change, created high school, but even the spin-off of deal fees didn't compete with it. It seemed to be the best thing in town. And I was there for 13 years, and I helped to build the experimental model for North America in that. And we, like I say, it was a new learning experience for me. But there was no university. There was high school now, but no university. Nobody seemed to be retiring rich. Nobody seemed to be accumulating any money of any consequence. Certain people were making a lot more money than they ever did before. And brokerage was different, but there was no future. Still only as good as your last transaction. Okay, so when you stop, it stops. When you slow down, it slows down. When you step off the tracks, it's over. We needed to build in leverage. We needed to be able to tap into the energies of other human beings. And that's what we set out purposely to do. Now, as you look at this and look through your bank manager's eyes, because as we look through the broker's eyes, we look through the agent's eyes, we look through the bank manager's eyes, we look through the customer's eyes, you have to empathize with everybody in order to create a new system. And the banker really thinks that you've been dropped off on the island and that they burnt the ship. Some of you have been here for 20, 30, 40 years. Since you've been here for so long and you're totally indoctrinated as a real estate agent, you're pretty good at it. Did you ever try to go back to a real job? Did you ever try to go back to 40 hours a week, 9 to 5? Do you know that very few people return safely? It seems that once you're in this business and you're totally spoiled by it, you seem to be spoiled by it, you're in it and you can't get out of it, that you never, from that point forward, I don't know if it's the commissions, the running around till 2 o'clock in the morning, the competition, the big commissions, I don't know what it is. But whatever it is, it seems to stick you here like crazy glue. You can never go back to what you were doing before you came here. So since you're on the island and you can't get off, we might as well look at this and see if there's a better opportunity. Maybe there is. You'll know by the time you leave the room. Check it out. Maybe the slipper will fit. So we get some problems. What's the biggest problem? There is a biggest problem. I'm going to expose this one to you because you'll feel it right at your table, right where you live. This is the biggest problem. It's time for this kind of exposure. If we're going to solve things, we've got to get to this one as well. When I was put in charge by the big corporate chief, I was asked to do a lot of experiments. And the experiments involved investigating the real estate industry throughout the North American continent to find out why certain things are transpiring. For instance, one of the questions was this. Why do a very few people in the industry make a lot of money, a ton of money, and a whole bunch of people make very little at all? Why is that? I was asked to study the genius in the industry. Now, isn't that an interesting question? Study the genius in real estate. Imagine having that one dumped on you. And some of the studies were 3 years long, some of them ended up to be 7-year studies. So it was a long time taking a real good look to see what's there, you know, what's really happening. And we found that the genius in the industry, this is kind of interesting, the genius in the industry was not in the heads of management, had not been there for 25 years. It was in the heads of the top producers. But guess what? They weren't telling. They wouldn't share their information with anybody. They knew how to score the points, how to put the trades through the board, how to sell, how to do it. Management didn't seem to know it, how to do it. In fact, if they knew it, they'd be out doing it, right? The top producers knew, but they wouldn't share. And as we saw ego start to grow, we saw this expertise factor there, but they wouldn't pass down the wisdom to anybody else. So there was a lack of pass-me-down wisdom in the industry, and that's another reason why the banks don't want to lend money to this industry, is because the ones that actually know the answers won't share it with anybody else. Now, so if you